further ado, Bill Chiggins, I'd love for you to come up and introduce our guest speaker that is also well known to us.
I just found out our speaker needs no introduction. All the way from Ohio State. Jim Connect, come on, tell us what you're doing.
Hell of an introduction. You taught me everything I know, Joe.
Thank you.
Well, I have something I'm going to talk about, but before I get started, Bill asked me if I would explain how I got here from Ohio. So I will. I hope it's an interesting story. I think it kind of is. Now, back in 1972, when I graduated from Ohio State, I had grown up and lived in Ohio my whole life. I also, that year, was drafted. I was one of the last groups drafted during the Vietnam era. I went into the service in September of that year. I think in October it was the final group drafted, so I was going to be in the Army for 2 years. So I did my basic in Fort Knox, and the Army, in its wisdom, assigned me to something called the Veterinary Field Service, which I thought I would be cleaning stalls for horses or something like that. But what it is, in fact, is all of the produce and food that the Army buys gets inspected. And it's inspected by veterinarians and other Army guys that are in the Veterinary Field Service. So I got sent to Chicago for an 8-week training where we learned all there was to know about meat processing plants and fish and eggs, how you inspect an egg, potatoes, everything. 8 weeks. And then toward the end of that engagement, one day they came in and they gave all of us a list of every Army base in the world and said, okay guys, pick your top 3 where you want to go. The chances are very good that you'll get assigned to the first one. You'll certainly get assigned to one of the 3. So growing up, I had always thought, boy, I'd like to go to New England. So I looked at the map, and there was Fort Devens. Fort Devens was still an active fort back then. So I put Fort Devens, and lo and behold, I got assigned to Fort Devens. So by, gosh, it was probably February by that time. I flew up to Boston. I had no idea where Fort Devens was. I just knew it was somewhere near Boston. I had no idea how I was going to get from Logan Airport to Fort Devens, just that I would, because I was a dumb kid, things happen. So anyway, at the airport, somebody who was going to Fort Devens, another soldier, sort of saw me and realized there's a confused guy who's probably going to Fort Devens. So he said, are you going to Fort Devens? And I said, yeah. So he and I took a cab and off we went. And I got there and they processed us in and so on and so forth. So after we had been there about 5 days, we got called, a group of us, 5 or 6 of us, got called into the officer's office. And he had a look on his face that was just so awful. I thought, oh my God, something terrible has happened. We're going to get shipped somewhere we don't want to go, and so forth. So he said, man, I've got some news I've got to tell you. Unfortunately, you're all going to be assigned to packing plants in Boston. And because of Army regulations, you can't commute from here to Boston. It's too far. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to get living space in Boston. Now, you'll get an allowance on top of your salary to cover your rent and whatnot, but you're going to have to live there. So we thought, oh my God, this is absolutely wonderful. So here I was, and this whole engagement sort of very well defines. I had an older brother who also got drafted during the Vietnam era. The difference, how life has treated my brother and myself. He got drafted and he was sent instantly to Vietnam, where he was in the infantry and on and on and on. And he spent his 10 months there and then came back. So here I was, 5 months after I got drafted. I was living with 3 other guys, one of whom had graduated from Boston College. We were living in an apartment in Chestnut Hill. And commuting it down into Dorchester and Roxbury to inspect food at the packing plant. So anyway, to make a long story short, that's how I got to Boston. And basically after that, I've just never left. And we stayed, my wife and I lived down near Boston until 1998. And then we had sort of planned that we were going to sort of shift downward our lifestyle and decided we were going to move up here. And we ended up in Wells because her family had vacationed on Moody Beach forever. So we knew the area, and we were fortunate enough to find a house where we settled in, and it was the greatest move we've ever made. I love living in Wells. Hopefully you'll settle here and likewise. It's a great place to live. The second best thing that ever happened to me was when I got the job with the Co-Star, because that got me into writing more, which I've always enjoyed a lot. But it also got me plugged completely into the community. So I got to know so many people. It was funny, I used to tell this story. There were very few places that I can go back then when I was a full-time reporter where somebody didn't know me. Now that was both good and bad because if you're sitting at dinner, you wonder, should I have that second glass of wine or not, and all of that stuff. But I've been able to stay in touch with through the Co-Star. I only do a couple columns now a month, but it's great fun and so forth. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying how I got here. So having said that, let me get into my presentation, and I got a few minutes, I guess. I want to talk about, right now I'm working at York County Community College. Some of you probably know that. I'm what's called the grants coordinator there, and I work in the institutional advancement office with John Renoni, who I'm sure you all know. John is a great guy, and he's a wonderful person to work for. And what I'm going to talk about is an idea that we implemented just this past fall that he learned of at a conference he went to and brought home the idea, and then we decided we would go with it. And what it was, and some of you may know this because I think I did talk to some of you, and some of you actually were visited, it's called a volunteer blitz. And we got the idea from a community college in Georgia. And what they do is they get a whole group of volunteers, people who work at the college, students, alumni, business people, and so forth. And every year on one day, they go out to a bunch of businesses. I think this is the 6th year that college has done this. And right now they visit over 700 businesses. And what they try to do is sort of spread the word about the college, and also they hope to raise money. And they raised, this is part of their overall annual fund campaign, but in the 6th year, they raised $320,000. Wow. Which is a significant amount of money. When they started, they raised $60,000. So they've grown that much in that amount of time. Again, I want to emphasize that's their entire annual fund campaign. It's not just what they get from the businesses. So we decided that we would float the idea with the foundation board of directors and see if we could do something here in New England that would be like that. And the board bought off. And what we decided to do in the first year, since it was new and since we didn't have a whole lot of time to implement it, is we decided we would focus visits on 10 communities in York County. And those communities ended up being South Berwick, Kittery, York, Ogunquit, Wells, Sanford, Kennebunkport, Biddeford, and Saco. So over the summer, and this was like organizing a military campaign, we had to get, first of all, a suitable number of volunteers so that we could cover as many businesses as we wanted. And then what we decided was we would try to do somewhere around 250 to 300 visits to businesses. What the people in Georgia told us was they assign teams to visit 12 to 15 businesses, and they do it in an afternoon, or in a morning. They do theirs in the morning. So over a 3 or 4 hour time period, they told us that was an adequate number of businesses that could be visited comfortably in that amount of time. So we did a couple things to begin. First of all of us in the institutional advancement office, there were 6 of us, we decided, gave people's names that we thought might be willing to volunteer. We identified staff people at the college and alumni and so forth. We ended up soliciting 120 people, hoping that we could get about 50 to actually show up and volunteer for us, and we were able to do that. We ended up, I think, with 52 or something like that. That allowed us to basically chart out 24 different groups of businesses. So we contacted every Chamber of Commerce and asked for their membership list. That's how we started. And then one afternoon, John Ranoni and I sat down and we went through all these various business lists and we carved out 24 different routes that were comprised of somewhere between 12. We ended up, I think one of the routes had 19 businesses, but we tried to keep it around 15. So we ended up with a total of 347 businesses scattered around York County that we were going to visit with 2 or 3 person teams. Okay. Having done that, we had to figure out how are we going to let the businesses know that we're coming. So again, we used some of the information that we got from the folks in Georgia, and we decided we were going to do a letter to each of the businesses saying, this is who we are, this is when we're coming, this is why we're coming. We're hoping, to make new friends, we're hoping to make new contacts, and by the way, we're also hoping to make a little money if that's possible. So in the letter, I remember I wrote this up fairly carefully, and toward the end I said, okay, if you would rather we focus our visits elsewhere, feel free to use the enclosed envelope and just send a contribution in now, and we won't bother you on October. We decided on October 4th. So I said that, and then I also said, and by the way, if you're not interested in us visiting you at all, please just let us know, and we won't bother you at all. So we started, I think the list was 347. About 25 or so people actually contacted us after that first letter. Interestingly enough, there were 3 or 4 that actually sent us money. And one of them not only sent us money, but they said, by the way, we'd be interested in hearing about some internship possibilities if you've got students who'd like to work in our business. So that was one of our goals starting out, was that we would not only raise money, but that we would also get the community more aware of the college, and also what services our students might be available to offer them, or jobs, or whatever they may want. So anyway, we lost a handful of people who actually gave us money, and then there was another group who said, no, we can't do it this year, please leave us alone. So when the day came, we were down, I think, to about 320 businesses that we visited. 2 weeks before the date we chose to visit, we sent out another mailing. And this was just a postcard that said, we're coming, don't forget. October 4th, between 1 and 5, our volunteers will be visiting you. And then 2 days before, 2 evenings before, we decided, we thought, just to be safe, we're going to call everybody and let them know again. So we don't want the volunteers to show up and just be met with blank stares. So we figured, how can we make all these phone calls? And we decided, I looked into basically telephone services, and it's amazing. You can get these robocall services for as little as a penny a call. So we were able to set this up.
Oh, wonder there's so
So,
many.
pardon?
No wonder there's so many.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this was there are these robo-pollster groups that you can deal with and everything. So we were able to set this up, and we recorded our own message, and I think it was the evening, 2 evenings before the October 4th, so it would be October 2nd. The calls went out, and so forth. And we heard back from a couple of people who, again, said, please don't visit us, and so forth. So that reduced our number. So anyway, on October 4th, we gathered all the volunteers, and they all showed up. I think there were 2 exceptions that didn't show up on the day, so we were very pleased about that. They had been assigned their teams, and they had been assigned their routes, and all of the routes included a map. And one of the totally unforeseen side effects of this whole process was I became so good at Google Maps, you wouldn't believe it. And it's amazing how you can set these up in order, you know, some geographical order and everything. It's wonderful. So anyway, all of the volunteers, they had maps, they had contact names, you know, we gave them little volunteer pins for York County Community College to let them know who was coming and so forth. So they all set out, and it was a rainy day, unfortunately, and then John Rainoni and I sat in the cafeteria, and basically we were like command central. In case anybody had a problem, they would call, and I remember I had to run out and meet with a team that was doing Kennebunk because they ran out of brochures and things like that. So over the course of time, people started to drift back in, and some of them reported some, you know, decent success. Others were disappointed. But all in all, I think we had a fairly successful day. Everybody was able to get their route in the amount of time, so that logistic worked well. And at the end of the day, it was about, I guess, 5:15 or so, John and I had gone up to our offices, and the phone rang, and it was a group, one of the groups that was in Biddeford, I think it was Biddeford, and the request was, we have a $5,000 check. What do you want us to do with it? So John, we thought it was a joke, and John laughed, and then no, they were serious. It was a $5,000 check. One of the things that people in Georgia had told us of their experience was, there are people out there who have wanted to contribute and didn't know how. And this gave them a vehicle to be able to do that. They actually had somebody give them $10,000 the first year that they did this. So anyway, at the end of the day, when we had collected pledges, some came in later and so on and so forth, we ended up raising $10,600 from 43 different donors, 32 of which had never donated to the college before. So they were brand new donors. In addition, we had a variety of people say they were interested in talking to us about setting up internships. So John spent the next couple of weeks getting back in touch with all of those folks and so forth. So I think we had, I guess, 3 goals. Increasing the visibility for the college, we certainly did that. Raising money, we certainly did that. John was very positive about this from the very beginning, that any money we raised was found money. This was the first time we'd ever done this. We didn't know what the outcome would be, but we were happy that even if we raised $100. And then the third thing was, we wanted to sort of grow the group of volunteers, and I think we successfully did that too. I was very concerned that either the routes would be unmanageable, and to guard against that, actually, among the 6 of us in the office, we drove or walked every one of the 24 routes before the event, just to make sure that it was time worthy and so on and so forth. So we were happy about that. The one thing, and this, as far as lessons learned, there were several. Remember what I told you about the letter, the follow-up postcard, and the robocall? I would say 60% of the places we visited had no clue why we were there or who we were or that we were coming at all. So after all of that, we had made a conscious decision not to do a lot of advertising. The people in Georgia, actually, they do billboards and TV ads and everything else. We made a decision not to do any of that. Our rationale being, what if we get everybody all wound up and then we visit 300 businesses and there's hundreds more that don't get visited, and they're saying, what's wrong with us? I don't know that was a wise decision now, seeing what happened, but we'll have to revisit that whole process, because it's unfortunate. I guess I could understand some of the letters, particularly if, let's say we went to some of the resorts. We went to a lot of resorts, particularly in Algonquin and here in Wells. We sent it maybe to the owner, and the word never got down to the people that were at the front desk when the volunteers showed up and things like that. But other times, there were places waiting for us. Gary, you guys were?
Yep.
Yep. So anyway, it's a learning process. The other thing that we learned is we tended to, because this was the first year we did it, we basically went to places that we were most familiar with. So we heavily weighted Ogunquit and Wells and York with routes. I think we had 4 in Ogunquit, 4 in Wells, 3 in York, and so forth. Next year, I think we're going to look at that a little bit differently and target some of the other places. Particularly, most of our students come from Sanford. So I think what we'll do next year is maybe highlight some more routes in Sanford and downsize some of the ones in other places. But we're going to look at that, where the money came in from and where the contacts were most successful and so forth, and do it that way. What else? I talked about the volunteers. Yeah, I guess I'll close by saying one of the things, getting back to the volunteers, there were groups that came back and they were totally energized because they had either met alumni who were working at the businesses they had visited, or they got positive feedback about some interaction that people at the business had had with the college and so forth. So I think it was a good experience regardless of how much money a particular team brought in. I think it was a good experience for them. And again, I think we called the campaign "You Connect Community and College." And from that standpoint, I think we had made some nice connections. And even better, we certainly are going to do this again next year and build on the success that we had. We put all this together pretty much over 3 months' time. So it was very intense. In July and August, I didn't do anything else but this particular project. But anyway, so now we have a whole year to do it, which probably means that I'll wait until next June and we'll do everything. So anyway, that's the story of the volunteer blitz. If anybody has any questions,
as far as your groupings, do you suppose most of it was from the service industry, especially down in this area, or was it more?
Down here it was in York, Wells, and Ogunquit, it was primarily service industry, yeah, resorts, restaurants, and so forth. Less so in Sanford and Biddeford and those places. So again, we're probably going to look at the mix of businesses and tweak that a little bit for next year.
2 questions. Does the money go, does what you're collecting go into your operating budget?
It goes into the foundation's general fund, and we use a lot of it for scholarships. The foundation supplies all of the scholarship money for the college.
And do you have an endowment?
Yes, we have. There are a variety of endowments in the scholarship program. Yes. So this, I don't know exactly where this money will go, but my sense is it's probably going to go mostly for scholarships because we have unmet need in that area. Yep.
Great,
Thank you.
very interesting. And Jim, as you know,